So I'm excited. We are official now. I am excited to be talking to you today about Prebanned. So I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen so that you can see some of what we are going to be doing today. So I do encourage, if you have a wind instrument, have it handy. You'll be able to use it later. And you don't have to necessarily have a pre-band instrument to participate today. You can use a recorder or you can use a full-size band instrument. So when we talk about pre-band, if you've never heard that term before, what we're really talking about is a bridge between recorder and beginning band. So I just want to make it very clear that we're not trying to replace recorder, and we're definitely not trying to replace beginning band. But the goal, as in the title of the session suggested, that we're trying to support students in their instrumental journey. So the recorder has a very historic and long-standing place in music education. It teaches a lot of great things. But if you go from a recorder to a trumpet, it's a very big jump, I think we can admit. You're suddenly asking students to think about embouchure, lots and lots of air support, plus a really big, heavy instrument. So pre-band just provides instruments that are a little bit more suitable for young learners. And the goal with pre-band is to help students be successful. So in my own personal teaching, I was teaching K-5 education, and I was finding that my students were using the recorder, but we didn't start beginning band until 6th grade. So students were losing interest before they even tried for the beginning band. So by 6th grade, they didn't even want to try out for it. So with the pre-band instruments, I was able to keep that interest in learning an instrument, and then they had something they could progress up to and felt really proud to play. So I'm holding the Nuvo 2, if you haven't seen that before. And there's also the Nuvo Dude, which has an actual reed on it. And the concept behind these instruments is that you extend upon the recorder. So you're actually using your recorder fingerings, but you're learning an embouchure and using more air support. So just to make really clear, if you have any questions about what pre-band is or what programs look like, put it in the chat. We can talk about it at the end. But I just wanted to highlight kind of where pre-band stands in the music education field. So pre-band is interesting for all teachers, whether you're an elementary teacher, band teacher. I'm going to guess quite a few of you might be both, because as music educators, we tend to have many different roles. You might be your own feeder program. So pre-band is really interesting because if you're an elementary teacher, you can connect those music experiences to learning an instrument. So everything you're already doing, you can just extend. If you're already teaching recorder, pre-band just takes it that one step further. And it's really easy to create mixed ensembles. I work with a lot of pre-band teachers who combine their Nuvo pre-band with the xylophones and the ukuleles, the drums, and it creates a really cool concert effect. And every single student is involved on a level that they feel comfortable with. So there's lots of possibilities if you're an elementary general teacher. And then if you're a band teacher, pre-band might be a good retention and a tool to use to increase your band size. So concept being, if a student is successful with their pre-band instrument, they're more excited to try for the full-size band instrument and grow your program. So a lot of pre-band teachers that are their own feeder program use pre-band in that way. So that's just a quick highlight. Today I really want to get into the activities and get you involved, but I just wanted to highlight the different applications of pre-band and to say that no two pre-band programs are the same. Every single teacher has different goals, different students, so you can adapt pre-band very easily to what you need. So today we're going to be talking from the WinStar's pre-band books. The concept is that we're combining lots of best teaching practices in music education to create a pre-band program. So you're going to see influences from the Dalcroze methodology and Orff, Suzuki. You're going to see all those different influences in there, Gordon, Feyerabend, combined with your really solid instrumental techniques. So WinStar's 1 is for the Dude and Toot that I have here. And WinStar's 2 books are for the larger Nuvo instruments. Now, everything we're doing today can absolutely be used with recorder and can be used with beginning band. but just so that you know where all these ideas are coming from. So before we get into our first activity, I'm just going to lay the foundation. So I am going off the assumption that you have already introduced your students to rhythms. So whatever rhythms you're starting with, they have had experiences saying, moving, keeping a steady beat. Those are all important experiences. If you teach elementary general music, I'm sure you've already introduced your students to lots of different activities with that. It's important that students have explored pitch so they can identify high and low notes. They have used their voice to create those high and low notes. So that's important before you start teaching an instrument. And it's important that students move their air. So when I teach recorder, my mantra is always less air, and that's how you get less squeaks, right? But when you're talking about pre-band instruments and beginning band instruments, suddenly students need to use a lot more air. So make sure that you're providing opportunities where students can practice using their air and they have specific examples to think about. So to give you one really quickly, I talk about our diaphragm being like a hot air balloon. So giving them a visual of a balloon expanding and deflating. Something as simple as that, where they're internalizing what the air should feel like as they're breathing before they apply it to an instrument. And then when you bring in the instruments, whatever instruments you're using, I'm going off the assumption you've already taught them how to hold it, how to create their first sound with their embouchure, and articulate. So if you have any questions about how I introduce any of those, you can put it in the chat. But today I really want to talk about after you've introduced all these things. So I know that I can get students to make a good sound and articulate, but where do I go from there with my pre-band? So we're going to start and we're going to be looking at what is called the Super 6 learning experiences. So these are the 6 categories of activities that pre-band really focuses on. And the goal is that you're incorporating different experiences in each lesson. So my personal goal when I'm teaching pre-band is to try to hit 2 or 3 different experiences in each lesson. So if I have a movement activity in the beginning of my lesson, maybe later on I'll do something with improvisation. So you want to make sure that you're using different experiences because that's how you're engaged different learning modalities. So you're making sure that students are practicing listening, the visual aspect of seeing, the kinesthetic of moving, but also the tactile of touch, so that we're engaging all those different learning modalities to make sure that every single student is successful. So I say 2 to 3. And in today's session, we're going to do a specific example from each one of these 6. And then I'm going to give you just some ideas on how you can extend it. And these are just to get your own creativity flowing. There's no dictated lesson plan. You must do this, you must do this. We really want you to think about, okay, how can I incorporate students maybe using an activity I already use, and I'm just going to extend it one step further with the instruments. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that you start over from scratch. You can adapt what you're already doing, which is really exciting. So let's get right into it. So we're going to go into movement first. And I like to do activities. Usually I do them without the instrument first. And then I bring the instrument in later. And I usually do one activity many different times throughout the year. So for example, if I do this movement exercise, I might do it again in lesson 7 and lesson 10, maybe making it slightly different each time. But repetition is very good in pre-band. Don't be afraid of repetition. So we're going to use a song called Ba Goes the Sheep. You see the iconic notation there, which is really great for younger learners. It's just an option. You can absolutely use standard notation, but I just wanted you to have an opportunity to see what the iconic notation looks like. And it's a really visual way to help students internalize what's higher and what's lower. So if we're going to sing our song first, I do lots of singing. I also want to put it on our bodies. So I say, okay, what is the highest pitch in this song? B. What is the highest point on our body? The head. So when we sing B, we're going to put it on our head. And then A is a little lower. I usually get students saying the shoulders. Some might be silly and say the chin or the cheeks, but we're going to say shoulders today to keep it simple. So we're going to sing it once, showing that B and showing where A is. So you'll hear 4 clicks and then we'll start. So let's sing it and move together. 2, 3. B, B, A, A, B. 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 Good. So we're kinesthetically reinforcing where the pitch relation is. And we're going to take it one step further, and I want you to show me the note duration. I don't use all these words with my students, but with you I can. So the half note B, you can stretch it out on your head. I have some people that like to do like a little dance with their hands to show longer note. So quarter note, half, or quarter note, half. You can pick whichever you like, but I want you to show me where the long notes are this time. Really long one. Yes, and make sure we have the full whole note on the end. So now that they've moved and they've sang, then we apply it to the instrument. So I might do another repetition where we sing and move our fingers, and then we sing and play. So movement is really important in helping students internalize where the notes are. And I do a ton of singing. I ask students to sing almost everything before they play, and that really helps with intonation. So just something to throw in there as well. Just for fun, if you have a wind instrument, let's just play it together, just using notes B and A on whatever instrument you have. 4 clicks. Yes, and I saw some of you playing your air instrument. That's absolutely awesome. Very good. So that's one idea to introduce movement. Here's a couple of other ideas just to spark some creativity. So we showed the pitch relation on the body. You can use the Kerwin hand signs if you and your students know that. Experiences moving air. So I talked about a hot air balloon. I do a lot of things like simple things like, can you keep the piece of paper on the wall with your air? None of that is revolutionary. That's been in, music programs and methodologies, but I don't know that we necessarily give students enough experiences moving their air. So for example, if you're holding your baseball and when you're winding up, this is when you're breathing in, and when you send that baseball flying, really push it all the way out into the outfield with your air. So let's try that. Hold your baseball. We're going to wind up, breathe in, out. And you want to keep a full steady stream of air the whole time. And you can work on shorter and shorter windups to make sure that they're really getting a full breath each time. Keeping a steady beat is very essential. And I know elementary music does this very well. I think in beginning band, sometimes we could maybe reinforce more movement. So can they keep the steady beat of a new song that they're learning before they try to play it? Body percussion is always very fun, especially if you have students with difficult rhythms. I like to introduce all new rhythms through body percussion, through listening before they ever look at music. Same or different. So you can have students identify, you could play 2 different measures and say, are they the same or different? You can use the body percussion to really show how they're different. And then practice rest, which can be really difficult for some students. When we're moving, we must freeze on the rest completely. And that internalizes that we're not going to play on the rest on our instrument. So again, a lot of different ideas for how you can incorporate it. Those are just general ideas to get you started. The exact ways you implement it in your program depends on your students' ability and really the areas that they need the most support in. So if you have any questions in the chat, just pop them in there. We'll get to them at the end. So now we're going to move to echo. And I'm a big proponent of teaching by ear. I think it's very important, regardless of what age group I'm working with. I still do a lot of work with beginning woodwind players and even middle schoolers. I really like to challenge them to echo me without looking at any notation. And I think that really helps build a strong internal sense of the pitch and the physicality of playing an instrument. So we're going to try a tune. This activity is called Open Ears. You can see the tune name, so I'm sure you'll figure out what notes are in it, but pretend I didn't tell you anything. And we're just going to listen and keep a steady beat like this. Okay, so we would talk about, well, how many different notes do we think there are? We might have a couple more repetitions of listening to it. So let's pretend that we've arrived at the fact that there are 3 different notes. So we're going to put the highest note on our head, the middle note on our shoulders, and we'll say the lower note on our stomach. So then I give them an opportunity to show me where the pitches are without me showing them. So challenging them to be independent. And of course, you'll see the sneaky eyes looking around like, what's my neighbor doing? Am I right? That's fine. I don't mind. But I'm not going to give them the answer right away. Good. And then you encourage them to show that note duration again with their movement. And then, of course, I'm having them sing as well. So I usually have them sing first on a neutral syllable, la, usually, or two. And then we have them try to sing it on letter names. I say, okay, what are the letter names? Can you sing it now on the letters? So that's just a really quick overview of my process. And that might be over 2 lessons, or it might be in 1 lesson. But I really want them to go sequentially through that so that they've had opportunities to really internalize the song. And then I show them the notation. So we'll pretend that you've already played it without looking, but now here is your notation and let's play it together. So using your instrument or using your air wind instrument, pretend whatever you have, let's go ahead and play this tune together. So we'll hear 4 clicks. Whoops. Or not. Great. So that's an echo, and you'll see that I incorporate a lot of movement in the beginning part of that as well. So there is overlap within the Super 6, but just to really encourage you to try to think about introducing some things by ear, especially if you always introduce a song with notation. So that was the example, hear it, sing it, play it, and I also will add on read it. We took it one step further. I also use echoes to identify same or different, much in the same way I talked about movement. It might be me playing the examples. I might use recordings of where I made one mistake and they need to figure out where it is. So these are different ways to extend upon a tune that you're learning in class. I also introduce new concepts with echoing. So any new rhythms, I want to make sure that they hear it before they see the notation. And a really big part of teaching a wind instrument is to reinforce good tone. So if you yourself feel confident on the instrument and can produce a good tone, absolutely be the playing example for your student. Play them something, ask them to play it back. You really want to give them a good role model to strive for. Now, if you don't feel comfortable on every instrument that you're teaching, make sure you either find recordings or record something ahead of time. Students have to have a good example to know what they're striving for. So you want to make sure, whether it's at home practice or in the classroom, that in some way you deliver that good role model of sound and what it is that you want them to sound like. So again, just echo ideas just to jumpstart your own creativity. Make sure you're incorporating echo along with movement in your pre-band lessons. And then we get to improvisation. So I won't speak for everyone, just for myself, I was scared to death to teach improvisation because I don't personally feel comfortable with it. I'm not really strong in jazz. As soon as I go to improvise, everything I know about theory seems to just fly out the window. So I'm just going to give you a really simple improvisation activity and just show you that it doesn't have to be scary. So you'll see there we have a group pattern, just one measure. That's the pattern we're always going to come back to. That's our home base. And in between home base, we're going to be having individual solos. So everybody will play. And then it will be 4 beats of a student solo. And then everyone plays. And then you have a different student play, okay? So you don't have to start complicated. The first time I use this activity, I only allow students to use the note B, just because I want everybody to try. Nobody has an excuse if you're only improvising with one note. So and then I work up. If I bring this activity back in a later lesson, I might give them more freedom to try other notes or rhythms. But if you have a student that's nervous or scared, encourage them to go back to that one note. So let's do some improvisation. If you don't have an instrument, you can do some scatting or some singing improv. And we'll keep coming back to our group pattern in between. So I'll give you a count off. We'll start on B. Make sure you have something that keeps a nice steady beat. Group pattern, here we go. Here's your solo. Back to the pattern. Solo. Yes, wonderful job. Everyone take your bow. Great. So hopefully it wasn't scary. It didn't feel too scary for you. So that's a really easy way to start with improvisation. I like having students in a circle if possible, and we go around and hear everyone's solo. I generally add with a little bit of chaos. Okay, everybody improvise at once. Okay, beautiful. But just so that they're having opportunities to explore their instrument, but in a very safe space. So having only one measure to improvise, most students don't feel too overwhelmed with that because it's gone so quickly. So that's a really good place to start with improvisation. So that's what I mean by start simple, then build. Start with one measure. You could also then work up to 2 measure solos in between. I like to use a lot of student work once they get comfortable. So they can trade 4s, trade 8s, but they could do it in duets. So you have different groups around the classroom. So interactive, I always start as a big group, interactive improv, but then I like to work down to smaller groups and giving them a chance to try ideas on their own. I reuse backing tracks for improvisation. If you have basically anything to keep a steady beat, a beat machine, something you make a loop in GarageBand, even just a metronome. You want something to keep driving your beat together. I recognize that not all teachers are fan of pre-recorded music. So absolutely, whatever instrument you feel comfortable with, just make sure that you're providing context for your students to improvise to. And then record and evaluate. So I'm sure that students aren't necessarily going to want to watch the first time they improvise, but it does provide really good way for them to see their progress. So I might record a snippet of them playing, but not show it to them until the end of the school year and say, this is where you started, and here's your improvisation on the last day of class. And only for them, I don't show the whole class, but it's a really nice way for each student to see, wow, this is how much progress I've made in this amount of time, without them just having to take my word for it. Okay, so we're gonna move on to read. I think that as a general rule, music teachers are pretty good at teaching reading because teaching notation is really hard. So there are lots of different ideas already out there about how to do that. I think about read that I personally use iconic notation, but I also do progress to standard notation. But I just think that I want to give my students as much room for success as possible. So I personally see iconic notation as an easy way to do that. But I also think that reading is a really great opportunity to start to work on audiation. So that's Gordon's word for hearing the music in your head. So can my students sing and hear the pitches inside before producing it? And that's a really good indication of how their intonation is overall, I will say. So when I talk about reading, I generally have my students who can read a whole song, read it first. So let's just go ahead and sing it together if you want to add your motions. C is above B, so I always put it on my hat. Some students like top hats, some students like small hats, but wherever your hat lands is fine. So let's sing it and do our motions. Show me the duration, and then I'll show you how I work into them listening in their heads. So this time we have a written introduction, no clicks. So we're going to start up on our hat. C, C, D, A, A, G, A, A, B, 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 C. C, C, D, A, A, G, A, A, B, 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 C. Great. And then I would make sure that they can play it the whole way through. And I say, awesome. Now you are only going to sing what's in the circles. Everything else you're going to sing in your head. And can you come in on the right pitch? So again, that's really good to start with singing, but then you do it with your instrument. And you'll be impressed when you see, this note is very flat. So let's go back to singing it again. Okay, now we're more on pitch when we sing. Hopefully that helps correct it a little bit in the instruments. So let's use our instruments this time, or your wind instrument if you don't have one. We're going to play what's in the circles, and then in between, see if you can sing the pitch in your head. And I think it's really helpful to have a track like this with the melody part so they can hear what it is they're supposed to be internalizing. And then I work up to removing that and then see if they can do it without the aid in the backing track. So then I usually flip it and I say, okay, great. Now we flip it. And then I have the class flip into two groups, which is always a fun play off each other. So the blue boxes on one side, pink circles on the other. Can they do it back and forth? And then work up to seeing one of my big challenges is, can you sing the whole thing in your head and then come in on one random note that I point to? So if we're singing and then I suddenly point to the A quarter note, they didn't know it was coming. Are they coming in on the right pitch? So that's a really nice way to reinforce reading while also working on the internalizing and the playing. You can do that same thing. Instead of playing the pitch I point to, can you play it instead of sing the pitch I point to? So other reading ideas. So that was alternating measures. Start simple, then build. So I generally have students start iconic notation, but I have them start with music they already know how to sing and they already know how to play. So I use reading as a reinforcement of what they've already moved to, echoed to, and maybe even improvised over. Reading, I like to do a lot of what is the difference. So spot the error. They're very intuitive. They can find even the tiniest little error. So that's really strengthening their reading skills. And again, iconic notation is an option to start your younger learners. It doesn't mean that the students are going to land there forever. It just means that you're supporting what they're hearing with what they're seeing. Okay, so that's reading. And I know I'm going super fast, but if you have any questions, like I said, you can put them in the chat. So write can be difficult depending on the age group that you're working with. So with my elementary, this is where the tactile really comes in for me. I use a lot of manipulatives like what you see. Can I say a pitch? Can they find it on the staff? Especially when we're transitioning to standard notation. I do a lot of write down what I say. So if we're learning iconic notation, whatever system that is, can they translate what I've said? And I also do a lot of flashcard manipulatives. So writing doesn't necessarily have to be that they wrote the whole score out, but can they arrange the cards that I've given them into what I said? So you might have rhythm cards or you might have iconic notation cards. And when you're thinking about writing with especially younger children, it's really important that they start with tracing. Of course, a treble clef is hard to draw, but even a half note, I know I personally took for granted that students would be able to write a half note because to me, it seems so easy. But once I actually stopped and gave students a chance to trace a half note, oh, it makes sense that they've never actually done that before. So I had to kind of put myself back into the mindset of what does it mean to be a beginner? And that was a really important journey for me to say it's okay to take it all the way back to the beginning, make sure that they've had practice tracing before I ask them to do anything else. I also really like to start with rhythm. So when I think about writing, my students might write rhythms for half the term, and I don't necessarily have them worry about writing pitches until later on. And then I work up to the staff. So I don't automatically ask students to write out everything I've said with half notes, with the staff, with the pitches. That's a lot at once. So just break it down sequentially. Start with the rhythm. Once they can write the rhythm pattern, then add the pitches, then add the staff. And I generally do that through dictation. I also do a lot of writing related to language. So can they put words to the rhythm? And that will help it click for a lot of students. So if they're having trouble with a rhythm pattern, we actually write words to go with it. And I'm sure all of you are pretty familiar with lots of different notation software out there now, especially during the pandemic. It was a huge learning curve for me. And it was a great opportunity for me to explore different programs out there that make the transition to notation easier. So I won't get into that now because I'm sure you've personally experienced that. But if we want to talk about that later, that's another great tool. There's lots of good ones out there. Okay, so then we get to compose. And I like to compose lyrics as well as instrumental parts. And this is an activity I generally do really early on in the year. I tend to do it in the first or second class. So you'll see, hey, I'm your name. And I like to, so everybody think of something you like to do, one word. And then the second line, it doesn't have to rhyme, but if you want it to rhyme, that's cool. So, hey, I'm, and I like to, this is the second line. I like that. Oh yeah, I like that. So if you think of what you did, I'll give you my example. Hey, I'm Brittany and I like to ride. I'm a big bicyclist. Up and down hills in the countryside. I like that. Oh yeah, I like that. So that's a really easy lyric composition. We haven't even worried about the instruments yet. And then when everybody feels comfortable with their lyrics, then I say, great, let's add an instrumental part in the back. What should we do? So start pretty simple. Let's just do half note G and B. So we'll do. And let's just make it an ostinato. We'll just keep repeating that and you'll hear my rep while we do it. So join me on G and B. Whoop, sorry, I got excited. All right, so we'll start with the instruments right away. Hey, I'm Brittany and I like to ride up and down hills in the countryside. I like that. Oh yeah, I like that. And I like to have the instruments, they have 2 measures in the beginning and 2 measures at the end by themselves. So that's just one thing I like to do. But then I say, great, somebody else give me a 4 beat pattern. And so composing is really, it's kind of like the improvisation. We're just starting with a measure, but it enhances the rap. And some of them get very creative and it gets a little chaotic, but it's their composition. So we see if it works or not. So this is a great example of how we can compose lyrics with a simple instrument part all within the same activity. Now you might not do both in the same lesson. I tend to do the lyrics in one lesson and then I'll come back to it later and say, great, let's write some instrument parts to go with it. So that's one idea for compose. So that covers lyrics. It also covers the ostinato for the instruments. You can also add sound effects to story or a poem. Elementary has lots of great resources for that, but think about using sound effects with the instruments now. So I do a lot of sound effects with voices and body percussion, but then let's explore what this thing can do. And then I really like to encourage students to make arrangements. So using a simple tune, like any of the ones we've used tonight, can they arrange it to be their own thing? So they could add body percussion, they could add singing, they could add the audience to participate. Maybe they do, I get a lot of boom, boom, clap. That's a big audience part I get every year. Maybe there's an improvised section or echoes. So it depends on the age level of the group that you're working with, but having students create their own arrangements of songs is a really nice way to extend and give them some like composition creativity, I guess you could call it, and encourage them to use the instruments, but maybe also use some other sound effects and other things they have available, like their voice. So that was a whirlwind overview of the Super 6, but I hope it gives you some ideas on using the instruments to enhance the voice, enhance your singing, but you're also you're learning a lot of great skills that are going to transfer when you move on to beginning band. So I'm using an embouchure, I'm using fingerings, but I'm also learning to listen and to think in music that's going to translate to any instrument I play later on. The only word of caution I will mention, because I talked about movement a lot, is be careful with movement and the instrument itself. Movement with an embouchure is obviously very difficult, and you want to make sure that you're asking students to keep a good embouchure, which actually leads me right to the next thing. Throughout everything I'm doing in pre-band, I am always reinforcing these things with my students. So I'm consistently checking to make sure that the embouchure is good, because if they're developing poor embouchure, it's not going to set them up for success. I'm also making sure that they're supporting their sound. So I'll come back to air activities, maybe every lesson, every other lesson, because I want to make sure that they're continually thinking about that. Articulation, I mean, even older beginners are sometimes guilty of getting lazy with their articulation. So make sure you continually reinforce that. If I'm doing an improvisation activity, I'll use that as an opportunity with our group pattern to really practice the articulation of the group pattern. So that's a good way. And then I can evaluate students' articulations while they're improvising. And you're also double checking fingerings. So you want to make sure that students are playing the correct fingering so that they don't set themselves up badly for any other instrument. So that's a really quick overview. I'm happy to answer any questions. My email is there. So if you want to send me an email, I'm also going to include the link to these slides. So when you get a recording of this session, you can also have access to the slides if that's helpful. And feel free to use any of the tracks. Some of them are my creation, some of them are WinStar's, but a lot of the beat tracks are just really great way to reinforce that steady beat. So I'm just gonna stop the share and pop on over to the chat and see if there are any questions that can be answered. So, okay, so I have, do you have an ideal grade to teach recorder? We do 4th, but many of the younger students are interested. Yeah, so I think it really depends on your students. I personally taught recorder in 3rd grade. Some years that was perfect. Some years the students were a little bit young for it. So it really does depend on the grade and the group of students you have. 4th grade is a perfectly acceptable year for recorder. And it also really depends on when your students start beginning band. So in my district, we did 3rd grade recorder, 4th and 5th grade pre-band, and then they had the opportunity to join the band in 6th grade. So again, it depends on the resources you have, but also the maturity level of your students. Let's see. So age recommended for pre-band, that's great. So I tend to do 4th to 5th grade. You can definitely use the smaller pre-band instruments with 3rd grade. And I've seen as young as 2nd. They won't get as far. The 2nd grade I saw using them, it was a different teacher. It wasn't me, but they just did BAG and they didn't worry about the rest of the notes. So if that's your goal, 2nd grade is possible, but I tend to see 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. If you're using the larger Nuvo instruments, I tend to see that in 5th or 6th grade. And those are really used as a training tool for the beginning band. So the idea being all your students can try the Nuvo instruments, but then rotate. So my players will all try all 4 instruments and then know exactly what they want to play in beginning band. So that tends to be a little bit older because they're bigger instruments. They're not necessarily heavy, but because they're still plastic and lightweight, but it's just because it takes a little bit, there's more notes available to you. Oh, the cute little purple dots, those were just little pom-poms like I could find at the dollar store. I'm a big advocate of cheap and expensive tactile materials because, you know, kids, they don't last too long. Bingo chips are good. I once found pirate coins at the dollar store, just plastic, and then I made my staff to fit the coin. So if you have a chip that's a little too large for the staff, maybe make your staff larger. I'm a big fan of blowing up music, large notation, large for beginners. I think that really helps them internalize and see clearly what they're doing. Because in beginning band books, it's little tiny staffs and lines and spaces, which is great for older learners, but for younger ones, it definitely helps to make everything larger. A good notation software for iconic notation. Now, that's a great question. I am on the hunt if you find any. And actually I'd love to, like, if anybody wants to jump in, has anyone found one that they particularly love?
I mean, I think you can do a lot with Google Slides and PowerPoint. I was going to ask you what you use to make your visuals because they were beautiful.
Yeah, so I'm actually just using screenshots of the WinStar's music. Yeah, so on the WinStar's website, you can set up a free account and you can download every single tune I use plus way more. And I just take a screenshot of the iconic notation and pop it in a slide. And for me, that's so much easier because I can add the audio tracks separately. So it's a bit of work at the front end, but now I have it and I can reuse it whenever I want. I did a little bit with the Chrome Music Lab, but it just wasn't exactly what I wanted. So I find slides to work for me. And it's just a screen capture. I definitely don't make those little blocks and arrange them. I just capture the music that's already there and just build off that.
I was about to say, anytime I've created visuals, it's usually either on slides or Smart Notebook, and it just takes forever to plug in things. And so I was just wondering if someone had found one that used those blocks, because also getting those sizes correct, and it'd just be really nice if a program existed like that, but I'll keep looking. Thank you.
Yes, me too.
Someday some music educator will create that.
I was just going to say the same thing, Sarah. Sounds like there's an opportunity here for somebody.
Hint, hint, hint. Okay, so I see Megan says she has a class set of dudes and toots that they haven't had a chance to use because of COVID. That's a very popular reaction. You're doing recorders. How does it work with teaching two different embouchures, switching back and forth from one to the other? That's great. For fifth graders, and I teach beginning band, so totally fine with teaching the embouchures. Yeah. So I always have a backup activity for my students that I'm not working with. So I've taught the split classes. So I might be working with the toots and then have the dudes be working on something, a writing activity or something tactile. But the toot also comes with a first note lip plate. So I'm not sure if you've even gotten into this yet, but this is just like a recorder. And this is the one that comes on the toot. So the idea is a student can make a sound right away. You just wrap your lips around it like a recorder and you just make a sound. So I have all my toots start with this. So that way I don't really have to teach toot embouchure the first class, and I can actually focus on my dudes. And so once my dudes can make a sound, then I'll start to work up to this one and give students opportunities to try this lip plate, but I don't even bring it into the mix for a couple of lessons. And then I have students, if they can't make a sound on this, they can always go back to the first note lip plate. Don't be afraid of that. That's what it's there for, but give them opportunities to try. So to answer your question, Megan, I have the toots start really easy, and I actually focus on the dudes to start. And then in later lessons, will focus on the toots. And if that didn't answer your question, let me know.
Yeah, I want to ask a follow-up. So how long would you like keep them on one, or like allow them to switch back and forth, or like have them stay for several lessons and then try the other one? Or I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, and you can see what flow works for you. For me personally, I generally have 2 lessons on just this, and then I'll give them an opportunity to try this. And if they can't get a sound, we go back to this for the rest of the lesson. And then what I do is, as they walk in, we try this lip plate. Can you make a sound today? No, that's fine. We pop this one back on. So I give them an opportunity every single lesson until they can get it. And then once they get it, I generally just keep this one on. I don't go back to this unless something happens. Once in a while, I mean, if you've got braces going on or suddenly lost teeth and things aren't working, you can always go back to it. But once they get a sound on this, I stay on this.
What about switching back and forth between dude to toot? Or do you like assign these kids like you are a dude person for a really long time, or I don't know?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I would do half the year. Okay. So I don't wash and pass between classes. So once they have a dude, they are the dude for however long we do it. So let's say 7 weeks, and then I switch. And when I switch, I make sure I do my really thorough clean. I do my dishwashing. And I will tend to do, like, if I do notes B, A, and G, then I'll do B, A, and G again when they switch. But generally they'll get a little bit further on the second instrument just because they've had more experience. But I tend to do half and half, and they just stay on it for however long you decide. I just find it easier because otherwise you're fully sanitizing and making a lot more work for yourself.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to do that anyway because I like my campus is only 5th and 6th graders, so we have like 200 some 5th graders that we see like once a week, basically on like a rotation. So
Okay.
I'm gonna have to be doing some sanitizing anyway.
Okay, well, yeah, you'll be getting in there thick with the bubbles, but which is fine. I mean, the instruments can handle it, but if you have anything to do to make it easier, I would just keep them on it for however long.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great question. So let's see, I have Pam. We are exploring offering a pre-band class at my middle school as an elective to recruit 6th graders. Is there a lesson material to accompany the pre-band instruments for a class such as this? So I would direct you to the WinStars website. So that's all the tunes that I pulled from today. You can use the standard notation. There's that available. But maybe what you do is you pick a couple of songs that you like, and you can just put them in a slide or kind of create however you would like to present it. So there's no prescribed lesson plan, is what I should say. But that being said, I am happy to explore options with you. I love collaborating with teachers. So if you want some ideas, we can bounce ideas back and forth on email. I can help you create some materials. So I'm available. So definitely feel free to follow up with me by email if that's something you'd like to explore. But as of this point, we don't have a specific lesson for that. Let's see. And I think that was the questions so far in the chat. So does anybody have anything else? If you want to unmute, feel free to jump in.
I had a question. What do the other pre-band instruments sound like? Because it sounds like the toot sounds pretty much like a recorder or tonetic instrument. I'm just wondering what the saxophone or whatever it's called, or the little mini tuba sounds like.
Sure, yeah. Let me see what I have over here.
Okay, thank you.
I think I have some too, Brittany, so I'm gonna go check.
Oh, awesome. That would be great. Because I have a J flute handy. So this, I think, sounds just like a flute. And you have almost the full range of a flute. Fully chromatic. The benefits are it's much closer to the body, and you don't have to worry about the C foot, but very lightweight. And you have some keys that are extended. So it's easier for the little hands to reach that. So that's the J flute, which is pretty close to a standard flute. So let's see, I've got the clarineo here. So this is a clarinet in C. And this, again, uses clarinet fingerings, but the students are learning the correct fingerings for B flat. So when you transfer to B flat clarinet, they're going to use the same fingerings. They'll just hear a different pitch. And again, you have the 2+ octaves on that, which is really nice. Jessica, what do you have?
I should unmute myself. I've got a J flute.
Oh, awesome. Let's see. Let me put together my J sax.
If I was at the office, I'd have everything, but I'm not. I'm at home.
I know, I should have been more prepared. And actually, I'm really sorry. The only thing I don't have is the J horn because I loaned it out. But I can make sure I'll put a clip to a video example in the chat so you can check it out.
That'd be great.
Yeah, let me see if I can find that. Jessica, did you want to play anything? Not to put you on the spot.
Sure.
You don't have to.
That's fine. I'm going to move my headset away from me. Otherwise, it's going to be super loud.
Okay.
So hopefully we'll see how this sounds.
Okay.
Did that work? Could you hear anything?
I didn't hear anything.
Darn.
I heard a little bit. I guess my little follow-up for that is, at least on here, clarinet, not so much, but with the flute, it kind of sounds like a flute. Not that you would do like upper band with it, but would you ever do like normal beginning band with that version of the flute, like even halfway through and then transition to the flute? Or would you start them right on the like normal metal standard instrument?
Yeah, it's a great question. If you have the opportunity to do a pre-band, I don't put it in the beginning band. I make a very clear transition, which students like because they feel like they're graduating. So I wouldn't mix it into the beginning band. I have a very clear line. The other instruments teach a lot of skills. They're not maybe as close as the J flute is, but they teach all the right embouchure fingerings that are going to transfer to band. So I would say keep pre-band and keep beginning band in their own camps, but the pre-band is only going to make the beginning band stronger. And I actually put a playlist link on YouTube in the chat. So that's got a video example of every single instrument on Nuvo, and you can hear what it sounds like in the hands of an adult. So you can check that out there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for your question. Does anybody else have any questions they'd like to talk about? Great. Well, no worries. I know that Jessica and Sarah said that the recording link will go out to you, hopefully within a couple of days. So I'll make sure I include the slides. And then if you think of any questions in the meantime, like I said, I'm available by email. Happy to talk at any time.
Thank you so much, Brittany. We are so excited to have had you tonight. This was a lot of fun.
Oh, good. I had fun.
Tomorrow and just do some of these things with my kiddos.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. So as Brittany said, if anyone would like the slides or a recording, you will get those in the next couple of days from us. And also, too, we do offer a certificate of completion. If anyone needs that or wants that to share with your district or administrator, we're happy to provide that for you. A link for that professional development certificate request will be included in that follow-up email that you'll receive in the next day. Alternately, you can also send us a request via email at service@musicconstructed.com. And if you enjoyed tonight's session, then I hope you'll consider joining us for another pedagogical perspective, or a pedagogical perspective that we have coming up, which is actually next week, I believe, on Monday. We will feature Anne Fennell, who will be presenting a session entitled Social, Emotional, and Musical Learning Through Habits of Mind. And if that's something you're interested in, and I'm just putting a link to that in the chat. You can see our other sessions. We have just 2 more for the rest of the fall if you're interested in joining us for something else. But we were so glad to have such a lovely group of people to join us. Brittany, again, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us tonight. It was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot about pre-band that I never knew. So thank you.
Great. And thank you all for joining us tonight. I know we're all busy, so I really appreciate it.
Yeah, this was great. Great fun. On behalf of Music Constructed, thanks everyone for being here, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Take care.